Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. On March 14th, 1989, 3 days before St. Patrick's Day, University of Texas at Austin student Mark James Kilroy was kidnapped in Matamoros, Mexico, while vacationing during spring break. He was taken by his abductors to a ranch where he was tortured and sodomized for hours before being murdered in a human sacrifice ritual. Kilroy was murdered with a machete blow to the head and had his brain removed and boiled. His killers inserted a wire through the spinal column, amputated his legs at the knees, and buried him at a ranch along with 14 other people who had been killed there before him. The leader of the cult told his followers that human sacrifice granted them immunity from law enforcement for their drug smuggling operations. The killing drew worldwide media attention and initiated an international police manhunt because of the unusual circumstances of the crime. My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello, and welcome to tonight's show. Mark Kilroy was born March 5th, 1968, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were James William Kilroy, a chemical engineer, and Helen Josephine Kilroy, a volunteer paramedic. They moved to Texas from the Midwest after their son was born. Kilroy grew up in Santa Fe, Texas, a small town outside of Houston, for over 15 years, along with his brother Keith Richard Kilroy. He was raised as a Catholic, and his parents were frequent attendees of Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church in the adjacent town of Hitchcock, Texas. Kilroy excelled both in academics and athletics as a teenager, played both baseball, basketball, even golf with his friends at school. He was in the Boy Scouts of America and an honors student at the Santa Fe High School, where he was a member of the student council and was ranked 14th in his class of 210 students. Upon graduation in 1986, he attended Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas, before transferring to Tarleton State University in Stevensville, Texas, on a basketball scholarship. At Tarleton, he became a member of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity. It was there then he decided to give up his athletics and transferred to University of Texas at Austin to become a pre-med student and prepare for his medical college admission test. Kilroy's murderer, Alfonso Costanzo, was a Cuban-American who was born in Miami, Florida, 1962. His father died when he was an infant, so his mother relocated to Puerto Rico with him when she remarried. They returned to Florida in 1972 when he was 10 years old, and his stepfather died soon after, leaving a large inheritance behind. His mother married again, this time a man who was involved in drug trafficking and the occult. His father taught him the philosophy that Costanzo carried with him the rest of his life. He told him that he should let non-believers kill themselves with drugs, while he could profit from them in their foolishness. Around the same time, Costanzo's mother believed that her son had psychic abilities. She introduced him to Palo Mayombe, a Afro-Caribbean religion that involves animal sacrifice. He was also introduced to Santeria when he was younger. He started as a perro, someone who practices Paleo Mayombe, and eventually reached the status of high priest, padrino. In 1984, he moved to Mexico City to start his life as a tarot card reader and eventually developed a cult following. His charisma, physical attractiveness, as he had previously worked as a male model, and claimed psychic talent granted him the opportunity to mingle with Mexico City's upper class. His reputation for predicting the future and offering ritual cleansing became popular with some drug dealers, musicians, and police officers. The other cult leader, his second in command, was Sarah Aldrete, a Mahatmos native and honors student and cheerleader at the Texas Southmost College. She was the girlfriend of Gilberto Sosa, a drug dealer linked to the Hernandez clan, in which Costanzo wanted introduction. In 1987, she met Costanzo and eventually became the cult's main recruiter. Investigators believe that Aldrete's physical attractiveness and charm helped her lure men to join the cult, or to set them up to be abducted and subsequently killed. She recruited people by first showing them the 1987 thriller film The Believers, which was about a New York-based cult that practiced human sacrifice for money and influence. Costanzo's members were forced to see the film again and again and again in order to indoctrinate themselves to the necessity of human sacrifice. Students and teachers at her college in Brownsville recalled her as a friendly and studious physical education student who showed no signs of abnormal behavior or involvement of a religious cult. Across the border, in Mahatmaros, however, Aldrete was involved in drug smuggling operations and in cult activities. Some of her former classmates found suspicious that she drove a 1989 vehicle with an embedded telephone, while others recall she preferred to dress in all black. Investigators believe that her proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border allowed Aldrete to keep her two lives separate for years. Because of her contradictory lifestyle, law enforcement believed that Aldrete was living a double life and showed signs and symptoms of having a multiple personality disorder. The ranch where Kilroy was murdered in Mahatmaros, called Rancho Santa Elena, was owned by Bernardo Hernandez. He was not a follower of Costanzo, and he was not subsequently charged with any crime in the U.S. or in Mexico. The sudden death of Saul Hernandez in the shooting prompted his family, including Elio and his brothers Serafin Sr. and Ovidio, to grow closer to rituals and eventually become members of Costanzo's cult. Elio reportedly offered Costanzo half of his family's drug proceedings in exchange for his criminal contacts and supernatural protection for his family. On March 10, 1989, Kilroy's childhood friend Bradley Moore finished exams early at the Texas A&M University and headed out to Austin to pick him up. Both of them had been heading to Santa Fe to pick up two other friends, Bill Huddleston and Brent Martin, before heading to South Padre Island, Texas for spring break. After a foggy 9-hour drive to South Texas, they arrived at the South Padre Island shortly before midnight. They checked in at the Sheraton Hotels and Resorts the next morning before heading back to the beach. There were a few tourists when Kilroy and Moore initially arrived in South Padre at the beginning of a 5-week spring break season. As the weekend progressed, thousands of students from the entire U.S. began to arrive. Beer sponsors were staging a variety of entertainment events, including free movies, music concerts, calls home, surf simulating activities, and opportunities to appear on television commercials. Kilroy and Moore made free phone calls to their parents later that day. And then in the evening, they met with a group of female students from Purdue University and partied until the next morning. The following morning, Kilroy and his friends had more or less the daily routine in mind. They went to the beach in the morning and suntanned before lunch. After lunch, they went to the beach area behind the hotel for daily Miss Tanline contest. Once the event was over that afternoon, Kilroy headed to the hotel for a quick nap before planning their trip to Mexico. They left South Padre Island that evening and stopped for dinner at the Sonic Drive-In in Port Isabel, Texas, where they met a group of female students from the University of Kansas who were also planning a trip to Mexico. The women then followed Moore's car from Port Isabel to Brownsville and parked their vehicles close to the Gateway International Bridge just before crossing the U.S.-Mexican border on foot. Kilroy's friends and the Texas women spent most of their evenings at Sgt. Pepper's nightclub in Matamoros before the groups went their separate ways. Kilroy and his friends then returned to South Padre Island earlier the next morning. On March 13th, Kilroy and his friends attended another Miss Tanline contest right behind the Sheraton Hotel, and then in the early evening, Kilroy met one of his former frat brothers at a condo party. It was around 10:30 p.m. when Kilroy and his friends headed back to Matamoros, and again parked on the border and crossed on foot again. That evening, Matamoros was flooded with around 15,000 spring tourists in the U.S. on the city's main tourist street. The sidewalks, street, nightclubs were all packed with foreign tourists looking to enjoy cheap alcohol and Mexico's lax drinking laws. When they got to Matamoros, Kilroy and his friends decided to go to a bar with the shortest waiting line. They ended up at Los Sombreros, a bar with rock music and bright neon lights. After a few drinks, Kilroy and his friends left Los Sombreros and wandered to the London pub, which rebranded itself as the Hard Rock Cafe for spring break. This bar was louder and wilder than Los Sombreros, and Kilroy and his friends stood at the bar while other tourists threw beer from the balcony. Kilroy met a few women at the bar and was not seen by his friends for a while. At around 2 a.m., Huddleston suggested that the group head back to South Padre Island. As his friends stepped out of the London pub, they saw Kilroy leaning up against a car and speaking with a woman from Miss Tanline. Across the street, thousands of tourists were leaving bars and heading to Brownsville, but others moved in different directions. The large crowd of people made it very difficult for Kilroy and his friends to walk across the border uninterrupted and in a group together. It was at this time Moore and Martin separated from the group and walked to Garcia's, a popular restaurant store close to the border. Kilroy stopped at the steps of the house on the street to say goodbye to the woman from the Miss Tanline contest. He then waited for Huddleston to walk towards him. Huddleston then said he ran to a nearby alley to urinate while Kilroy waited for him. By the time he came back out of the alleyway, he caught up with the other two at Garcia's. Kilroy was not to be found. He had vanished. His friends searched for him for several hours, even after the establishments had closed and the streets had been cleared, to around 4:30 a.m. They then crossed the border, thinking Kilroy must have crossed into Brownsville and was perhaps waiting for them near their parked car. His friends did not find him near their car and waited a few more minutes in Brownsville before returning to South Padre Island. They thought that Kilroy probably left for the hotel with somebody else. They woke up the next day at the hotel and Kilroy's whereabouts were still unknown. His friends then contacted the police to report him missing. After this quick message, we'll be right back. Hello there, listeners. Whether you're new or you've been with me from the start, a great way to catch up and dive deeper into the world of mythical true crime is to check out my earlier shows. I've covered everything from Bigfoot to aliens and ghosts. Take a moment and browse through the past episodes, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means everything to me. At the start of the investigation to search for Kilroy, it initially began as a routine missing persons. Students were reported missing in Matamoros in the past and often turned up the following days with a hangover and blurry memory of what happened to them. Kilroy was one of the 60 people who had disappeared in Matamoros in the first 3 months in 1989. However, in this case, it drew more attention in the U.S. because his uncle, Ken Kilroy, worked at the U.S. Customs Service in Los Angeles. When the news reached his uncle, a police task force was created in Brownsville to search for Kilroy. Alarmed with the bad publicity of a disappearance and the potential effects of tourism in Matamoros, local police officers tried to shift the blame and suggested that Kilroy had disappeared in Brownsville. Kilroy's friends denied such claims, and the Mexican Federal Police Force vowed to work on the case and help the U.S. investigators. One of the commanders assigned Mexican agents to the U.S. officials to accompany them in Matamoros. Together they questioned informants, potential witnesses, and worked on tips provided by their sources. Both Mexican and U.S. authorities suspected that Kilroy's disappearance involved foul play somehow. They speculated that Kilroy could have been a victim of a drug-related violence or robbery killing, but they were short on leads as to make any firm conclusions. When Kilroy's friends reported the disappearance, custom agents went with them to Mexico to help retrace their steps. Texan officials contacted the U.S. consulate in Matamoros and asked investigators to carry out a search with Kilroy's description in the area of jails and hospitals. Investigators then hired a hypnotist to see if they could figure out any additional clues. While under hypnosis, Moore stated that he saw a young Hispanic man wearing a blue plaid shirt with a visible scar across his face, talking to Kilroy before he disappeared. He recalled that the man walked up to Kilroy and told him something around, "Hey, I don't know you from somewhere, do I?" Though Hiddleston said that he was not sure if Kilroy responded or not. However, none of the friends were able to precisely recall the exact moment or place where Kilroy disappeared. Investigators deduced that by this story, Kilroy was kidnapped for robbery or some ransom, and the first option was most likely because his abductors had not called for a payment. They believed that Kilroy's body was probably dumped in a remote location. Helicopters and terrain vehicles from the U.S. Border Patrol were called to look for the Rio Grande River, but his body was never found. During the investigation, Kilroy's parents headed to the Rio Grande Valley and circulated more than 20,000 handouts throughout the region and offered a $15,000 reward to anyone who could help locate their son. They met with Attorney General Jim Matix, a Texas Governor William Clements, and U.S. Senator Lloyd Bentsen to assist them on the case. Texan officials told Kilroy's parents that they were planning to talk to the Mexican state's governor, Americo Varela Guerrera, and many people of the Matamoros area would also be involved in their son's disappearance. It's about this time I noticed that I am mispronouncing the word, and I do apologize for mispronouncing certain names and cities. People from Kilroy's hometown traveled to Matamoros and issued flyers offering a reward to anyone who could provide information on his safe return. U.S. authorities had also praised the efforts of the Mexican federal police on the case, as they had distrusted the state and municipal officials. They suspected that because the state and local authorities were acting slowly and not sharing enough information, Kilroy's murderers had insiders within their ranks. On March 26th, however, the case was highlighted on national television crime show America's Most Wanted. This gave the case nationwide attention and generated several phone calls and letters from people giving clues on where Kilroy's whereabouts possibly were. However, the police stated that none of the leads generated were solid enough for anything to pursue. A few days later, Kilroy's parents returned to Santa Fe, and the Santa Fe residents raised money through garage sales and car washes to help Kilroy's family continue their search. In addition, Kilroy's parents went to the University of Texas at Austin to withdraw their son from school. The key break in the case was on April 1st, 1989, when Mexican federales manning a drug interdiction checkpoint saw a vehicle run the roadblock without stopping. The vehicle had crossed the international border from Texas and sped through the Mexican Federal Highway 2, which connected Matamoros and Reynosa. Instead of turning on their police sirens and stopping the truck, the police decided to actually follow it in an unmarked vehicle. The checkpoint runner then traveled out to the Santa Elena Ranch, outside Matamoros, and police pulled over off at a distance just to observe activity. After about a half hour, the driver of the truck took off from the ranch and headed back to the city. The officers decided to make their move on the ranch. In a quick search, the police discovered cult paraphernalia and marijuana traces. Police determined that the driver of the truck was Serafin Hernandez Garcia, a nephew to a local drug lord whose operations were based around the ranch area. But instead of arresting Hernandez Garcia, the police decided to also continue gathering more evidence on the suspected criminal activities at the ranch and organized crime members involved in the Hernandez family. They used informants in Matamoros to inquire on, quote, family activities at Santa Elena in order to make a more series of crucial arrests. 9 days later, on April 9th, they returned to with several other policemen and arrested Hernandez Garcia, his uncle Eleo Hernandez Rivera, cult members David Serna Valdez and Sergio Martinez Salinas, and also a man Domingo Reyes Bustamante, the ranch's caretaker. While in custody, the detainees were very relaxed. They were sent to jail while the police interrogated another caretaker of the ranch. This person revealed to the police that the ranch had been frequented by visitors of Seraphin's criminal group. The ranch's caretaker identified Kilroy through a photograph and stated that he did see him at the ranch. Quote, "Yeah, I saw him." He then pointed to a shack at the ranch, the caretaker told police. The police then interrogated Hernandez Garcia separately, and he confessed that several people, including Kilroy, had been killed over the course of several months at Santa Elena. Hernandez Garcia said that the slayings would be ordered by Adolfo Costanzo, a cult leader who practiced the ritual form of human sacrifice in the belief that it provided, again, supernatural protections for his drug gang. Costanzo believed that by sacrificing his victims, those doing the sacrifice were ensured strength, abundance, and immunity from law enforcement and injury. Hernandez Garcia said that Costanzo had ordered the men to find a white Anglo male to sacrifice. And according to Seraphin Hernandez Garcia, he and other members of the gang had mingled with spring break students in Matamoros at the night of March 14th. As Kilroy stood out on the street near his friends, one of the men lured him close to the truck. As Kilroy approached, Hernandez Garcia and other cult member Malao Fabio Pons Torres grabbed Kilroy and wrestled him inside the truck. When one of the gangsters stopped for the few moments just to catch his breath 2 blocks along the road, Kilroy broke loose and ran, but was later intercepted by another vehicle driven by a gang's allies, who took him prisoner at gunpoint. He was then subdued and handcuffed in the back of the second car. The gangsters drove Kilroy through the back streets of the city and past an industrial area, passing through the city's outskirts to the Santa Elena Ranch. The men left Kilroy inside the vehicle overnight. Shortly after dawn, the ranch's caretaker went to see Kilroy and fed him bread, eggs, and water. About 12 hours after Kilroy disappeared, Costanzo and his men came by to see him. They wrapped his face and mouth with duct tape and walked him through the field to a storage cabin with his hands still tied around his back. Through the night of the 15th, Costanzo tortured and sodomized Kilroy. He was then led out into a field where Costanzo killed him by chopping the back of his neck and head with a machete. His brain was then boiled in a ganga, a African metal pot that Costanzo used to stew human and animal remains. Kilroy's legs were chopped off just above the knee to facilitate his burial. A wire was then inserted in his spinal column so that, once the body had decomposed, the bones would be pulled up from the soil easily. The cult members then dug a hole on the grounds and buried Kilroy's corpse. Hernandez Garcia agreed to take the police to the spot where Kilroy was buried, which was marked by the ends of wire coming out into the dirt. Hernandez Garcia explained the function of the wire. Once they retrieved the bones, cult members would wear them as necklaces to ward off danger and injury. And then on April 11th, the police took Hernandez Garcia and 4 other suspects to Santa Elena Ranch and forced them at gunpoint to spend several hours digging up graves. Once Kilroy's corpse was exhumed, the police observed that his legs were missing. Seraphin explained that the amputations were not a procedure of the ritual. They were just done to simplify burial. When the excavation was concluded, the suspects had unearthed 15 mutilated bodies, including that of Kilroy's, all males who had been killed over a period of 9 months. Kilroy's corpse was officially identified after the Brownsville police matched his dental records with the teeth found at the scene. Investigators concluded that most of the victims were rival drug dealers of Costanzo and not random abductees, such as Kilroy. 3 of the 15 bodies were never identified. And at Santa Elena, the Mexican police also seized around 243 pounds of marijuana, 108 grams of cocaine, 12 firearms, including 3 submachine guns, and 11 vehicles, some equipped with telephones. Inside of an iron pot, investigators discovered the remains of a human brain, a goat's head, chicken feet, a turtle, several herbs, a horseshoe, and coins mixed with animal blood. They found no signs of cannibalism, however. The next day, the detainees were taken to the headquarters of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police in Matamoros for an informal press conference. More than 250 international journalists arrived at the scene to take pictures and ask them questions. 4 suspects were paraded from the building's balcony and were allowed to answer questions from reporters. Elio Hernandez Rivera stated that he was an ordained executioner under Costanzo and that Costanzo himself had murdered Kilroy. As the cameras zoomed in on the suspects, Hernandez Rivera showed his membership scars on his shoulders, back, and arms, and chest. These were arrow-like cuts made with a hot blade. The marks were given to the selected cult members with the authority to perform human sacrifice. On April 13th, a religious ceremony initially intended to revive hope for Kilroy's safe return turned into a memorial service, a day after his body was discovered. The service was held at Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church in Santa Fe. Many of the local residents attended the service, and about 150 children pinned yellow ribbons outside the church's trees to rally in favor of Kilroy. After the ceremony, Kilroy's friends stated that they wished they had stayed in Texas to party instead of going to Mexico. At St. Luke's Catholic Church in Brownsville, over 1,200 people attended the memorial service to support Kilroy's parents. Several of the attendees also wore yellow ribbons with "Miss You" mark written on them, and waited in line after the service was over to express their condolences to Kilroy's parents. The Kilroy family showed deep faith and conviction while speaking to the press. Kilroy's father spoke about the murder and told the press that they were not angry at the killers. He hoped that if those responsible for Kilroy's death go to heaven and see their son, they can apologize to him for their wrongdoing. Kilroy's mother told others to pray for the murderers. 2 days later, Kilroy's parents met with U.S. President George H.W. Bush and William Bennett, who headed the Office of National Drug Control Policy. They told politicians that every drug consumer, there's a victim who suffers from their addiction. In addition, he stated that drug consumption should be treated with better education, and that the use of drugs, even casually, causes suffering. Bush described the case as very sensitive, and Bennett stated that Kilroy's murder was more nationwide, but the parents were able to turn their suffering into a very good effort. After the meeting, the parents stated that along with Bush and Bennett were no specific actions their administration would take to fight drugs and enforce it at a local, state, or federal level. They were satisfied that the government was looking into at least the right direction. They praised the effort of the government in asking citizens what could be done to improve their country. Kilroy's father concluded that change required the government to do its part, but it also required every citizen of the country to put their effort in to make it happen as well. 2 weeks after the bodies were exhumed in Santa Elena, the Mexican Federal Police returned to the ranch early in the morning and burned down the shack and laid a wooden cross above the ashes. Reportedly, the police took a folk healer to purify the shack before burning it down. The curandero, as it's known, went inside the house, said a few prayers, and sprinkled the floor with salt, and concluded that by making the sign of the cross would bless it. The police then proceeded to spray gasoline around the shack before setting it on fire. The Mexican government offered no official explanation for their actions, but a source close to the investigation stated that the police motives were supernatural in nature. They said that they knew the shack meant a lot to Costanzo, and by burning it, it would make him go insane. Quote, "We would hit him where it hurts," the police said. The next morning, Costanzo reportedly went into a rage after the arson was shown on national television, on all channels. By murdering Kilroy, Costanzo attracted international attention and forced the Mexican government to focus their efforts on bringing him in, and those involved to justice. On April 11, 1989, the day the bodies were exhumed from the ranch, Costanzo fled to a Holiday Inn in Brownsville before flying to McAllen, Texas, to then Mexico City, where he had an apartment. He had escaped Sarah Aldrete, Martin Rodriguez, Omar Francisco Ochoa, and Alvaro de Leon Valdez, also known as El Dubi. U.S.-Mexican law enforcement agencies carried out an international manhunt to locate Costanzo and the rest of his cult members. The police believed that Costanzo had possibly fled to Miami to visit his mother, but Costanzo opted for Mexico City, where he hid with several of his followers for short periods of time. Rumor began to surface that Costanzo had been seen in Chicago, Illinois. Also, other rumors suggested that Aldrete had spotted near schools throughout the Rio Grande Valley, and that she had vowed to kidnap children for every jailed cult member. A convenience store clerk in Clovis, New Mexico, called the police and told them that he had seen a couple matching the description of Costanzo and Aldrete shopping at his store while purchasing something. According to investigators, Costanzo had been last seen driving a 1989 Mercedes-Benz in Brownsville. In Matamoros, the law enforcement raided Aldrete's house, where they discovered an altar and several religious images. They also stated that the house's interior was covered in blood. In Cameron County Sheriff's Office, authorities released a wanted poster of Costanzo, stating that he was extremely dangerous, and indicted him and Aldrete for aggravated kidnapping. Both were also indicted by the state jury in McAllen, Texas, along with 11 other cult members from Costanzo's organization. Charges included importing marijuana, conspiracy to import marijuana, conspiracy to possess with the intent to distribute, and possession on the intent to distribute. Cameron County officials also issued arrest warrants for other cult members who were at large. Although none of the leads proved successful, the police encouraged citizens to continue to help in their search. Later on April 17th, Serafin Rivera Sr., a Brownsville native, was arrested in Houston by DEA and Texas Department of Public Safety agents. Federal charges were filed against him for importing marijuana, possession, and conspiracy. Two other men implicated with him were Quintana Rodriguez and Ponce Torres, both Mexican citizens. As the police searched his Houston home, they seized cash and weapons, found no evidence of any cult paraphernalia or leads to Costanzo. Houston police believed that Costanzo was probably hiding in Houston because he was linked to a $20 million failed cocaine operation that had busted there in June '88. When the house was raided, investigators found ritualistic candles, an altar, and paperwork with Rivera's name on it. The police believe that Costanzo brought several properties, or had purchased several properties across Houston in the past, and was investigating if he had visited any of the alleged hangouts. Serafin Sr. cooperated with the U.S. officials and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was later released in June 1990 and returned to Brownsville. On April 17th in Mexico City, police raided one of Costanzo's properties. They had discovered piles of homosexual pornography and a hidden ritual chamber with an altar. This prompted the police to question people in Mexico City's homosexual community to see if they had any leads in Costanzo's whereabouts. Mexican police stated that there was no evidence found at the scene to link Costanzo or any of his men to the murders committed there. They said that the altars and other ritualistic belongings, but they did not find any traces of blood. Men were also arrested at the scene, but police managed to arrest a lady called Maria Teresa Quintana Rodriguez, sister of one of the Costanzo's lovers and henchmen. The police also discovered that Aldrete's purse and other belongings were left behind, which prompted them to conclude that Costanzo probably murdered her because she knew too much about his inner workings of his cult. But police stated that they did not see Aldrete with the group when they arrived in Mexico City. They thought that Costanzo might have buried her somewhere in the city. U.S. authorities, however, believed it was Aldrete purposefully left her belongings behind to confuse investigators and make it appear as though she was dead. On April 24th, the police arrested Victor Manuel Flores and Salvador Villaluz, who were hiding in one of Costanzo's properties in the Juarez neighborhood. The Mexico City Police Department then noticed that the Matamoros killings were similar to the murders carried out near Mexico City between 1987 and 1989. After consulting local witchcraft practitioners and sorcerers, the police heard that Costanzo was probably hiding in one of the city's boroughs. Another contact told the police that there was an address of interest in the Veronica neighborhood near they were initially looking. The police department sent 16 officers to search that area. At a supermarket, they interrogated a shoemaker who claimed to have seen a woman who matched Aldrete's description. The police then spotted a man at the supermarket who was attempting to buy large amounts of groceries with U.S. currency. They followed the man and saw that he was living in an apartment in Rio Sena. By the end of that week, the police concluded that the man was De Leon, and that he was buying groceries for Costanzo. May 6th, the police surrounded the building and waited for traffic to subside before raiding the premises. However, a black vehicle pulled up front to the apartment complex, and police walked over to investigate. Costanzo noticed the police from the window of his apartment and opened fire at the officers who were at ground level. Costanzo threw gold coins and paper money out the window, burned some of his money on the stove. Costanzo eventually ran out of ammunition and began to lose his patience. After about 45 minutes, he worried of his imminent capture. At this point, Costanzo took the coward's way out and ordered De Leon to kill him and Quintana Rodriguez. De Leon hesitated at the beginning, but Costanzo hit him in the face and told him that he would suffer in hell if he didn't do as he was commanded. Costanzo then hugged Quintana Rodriguez, and De Leon stood in front of him before he opened fire and killed the two with a machine gun close inside a closet. When the police climbed up the stairs and made it to Costanzo's smoke-filled apartment, Aldrete ran from the door screaming that Costanzo was dead. De Leon later confessed that Costanzo had lost his mind and saying things such as everything was lost and that no one was going to have any of his money, when the police raid forced him to barricade himself inside of his apartment. He also stated that he participated in Kilroy's murder and other killings at Santa Elena, but both agreed that Costanzo did most of the killings himself. Aldrete denied participation in any of the killings and stated that she was unaware of them until she saw the victims on national television. She said that she was sorry to hear about Kilroy's murder. She stated that she was not an official member of the cult and was barely going through the initiation. In addition, she stated that she was held prisoner during Costanzo's hiding in Mexico City, and when asked if she was in love with Costanzo, she denied it and said that she was only his follower. At the scene, the police took Aldrete, De Leon, Ochoa, and Juan Carlos Fragoso, and George Montes into custody. The police also arrested Maria de Lourdes, Guerrero Lopez, and Maria del Rocho Guerrera, other cultists under Costanzo, in Mexico City later that day. They were renting one of Costanzo's apartments. The individuals arrested that day were held for homicide, criminal association, wounding of an officer, and damage to property. Fearing that Costanzo might have purposely faked his own death, investigators conducted a fingerprint analysis. They concluded that the corpse was indeed of that of Costanzo's. Costanzo's 9mm Uzi submachine gun and his supposed suitcase were never formally presented by the police as seized items. On May 15th, a judge refused to set bail for the individuals arrested that day because they were wanted for crimes accumulating over 50 years in prison. On August 27, 1989, Ochoa was admitted to a hospital in Santa Marta after being diagnosed with AIDS. The police said that he and Aldrete were Costanzo's lovers, but Aldrete showed no signs of the disease in her immune system. He then later died February 11, 1990. On June 2, 1989, Salvador Alcaran, the police chief in the Federal Judicial Police, was indicted for drug trafficking. He was linked to Costanzo by Aldrete and other members who had claimed he acted as the group's contact with the police. Aldrete said that Costanzo told her that he had killed 2 men to gain favor with Alcoran. The police chief, however, defended his stance and stated that Alcoran's involvement with Costanzo was merely religious. He said that he was possessed by spirits at a young age and sought Costanzo for help. He was not charged with Kilroy's murder or any other killings conducted by Costanzo's group. In August 1990, De Leon was sentenced to 30 years in prison for killing Costanzo and Quintana Rodriguez. Vergosa and Montes were convicted of separate murder charge and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Reyes Bustamante, a ranch caretaker, was accused in court of a cover-up, and he was released from prison December 11, 1990, after paying a bond of $500. On June 10, 1993, drug trafficking charges against Avito and Ponce Torres were dropped in the U.S. without any stated reasons. May 3, 1994, Aldrete was sentenced to 62 years in prison. All other cult members received 67 years each, and in an interview with the press, Kilroy's parents stated that they were relieved to hear that the cultists were sentenced. The charges were multiple homicide, possession of narcotics, involved in organized crime, police impersonation, illegal body desecration, illegal possession of firearms, and illegal possession of weapons exclusive to the Mexican Armed Forces. The Mexican federal judge explained that the reason Aldrete received fewer years in prison than the rest was because that she was not charged with using weapons that were military exclusive, which carried a 5-year maximum sentence. He also stated that the maximum conviction a person in Mexico can receive for capital murder is 50 years. And since Mexico's judicial system does not have parole, it allows for prisoners to file motions of an appeal to reduce their sentences after several years. Whether this condition is denied or granted, inmates can push for a right of amparo, which in most legal systems is a Spanish word. Spanish-speaking world, the right of amparo is a remedy for protection of constitutional rights found in certain jurisdictions. The amparo remedy or action is an effective and inexpensive instrument for the protection of individual rights. On March 27, 1988, a Mexican federal court reduced the sentences of Elio Serrano Valdez and Martinez Salinas by 17 years, lowering their sentences from 67 to 50. And since the death penalty and life sentences are not part of Mexico's judicial system, reductions for charges that are over 50 years are common. In addition, individuals like the cult members who were charged with murder and other serious crimes that push the total sum above 50 years for capital murder often have their sentences reduced by an appeal court. If the individuals were first-time offenders, as the cult members were, an appeals court may determine that it was reasonable to reduce their sentences. However, as of 2009, only 2 suspects remain at large, Avito and Ponce Torres, and they are still wanted for Kilroy's murder in Mexico. Aldrete spoke to a press in 2003 and denied her participation in Kilroy's murder and in the cult killings. She stated that it was impossible for investigators to understand what had happened at Santa Elena because of its biggest evidence in the case. Costanzo was dead. Aldrete stated that the police hid the names of famous people involved with Costanzo for their own convenience. She concluded that by stating that she believed in God and she was not going to ask society for forgiveness because she was innocent of her crimes. The following year, Aldrete interviewed with the press again and stated that she had been tortured to confess. She said that she had been stripped naked, blindfolded, beaten upside down, and then had her toenails yanked off. Aldrete claimed that she was beaten so severely that doctors told her that she would not be able to have children. In the early 2000s, she published an autobiography where she detailed how she met Costanzo and the group, her experiences when she was allegedly taken hostage by Costanzo, her mistreatment by authorities, and her versions of her story. Andretti claimed she visited Costanzo in Mexico City and was later taken hostage after Costanzo decided to not let her go because he believed that she would go to the police and tell them where they were hiding. She claimed that Costanzo and the rest of the group were unaware of the killings that occurred in Matamoros until they found out the police were looking for them, but went into hiding nonetheless because they feared for their lives. She detailed her alleged mistreatment in trial and how she underwent beatings, psychological torture, rape, and an unfair trial. Her version of Costanzo's death was different than the official one. She stated that Costanzo was executed by the police when they raided the apartment. She also questioned the police's decision to burn down the shack in Santa Elena, since it was crucial for investigations and probably contained the fingerprints of murderers. Later, in an interview in 2014, Serafin and Martina Salinas gave their versions of the story, which proclaimed their innocence. Serafin stated that the federal judge, police commander Juan Benitez Ayala, found Serafin guilty because he was related to Elio and Ovidio. He said that he was not arrested at the ranch, but rather Elio's in-laws' house in Matamoros. He said that he grew up in Houston and moved to Brownsville for college, and that he was in Matamoros visiting family when he was taken in by police. Serafin said that he had been tortured by the Mexican police and U.S. police in Matamoros in confession for his participation in Kilroy's murder and in the killings that happened at Santa Elena. He said that he was allegedly beaten and told that he and his family would be murdered as well if he spoke English during any of his declarations. He said that he was a student of Texas Southmost College and knew who Andretti was, but didn't have any connection with her. Serafin also stated that he had never met Costanzo and no idea his family ranch was a gathering place for his cult. He said that he had never dug up the bodies and had been taken to the ranch after the bodies had already been exhumed. Martinez Salinas, on the other hand, stated that he was forced to confess because he was a neighbor of the ranch and driver to the Hernandez family. He said that he had been beaten and taken to the ranch where he was told to pose with the exhumed bodies. When asked if he had ever met Costanzo, he stated that he had seen him in person once at the ranch and with the Hernandezes, but never actually spoke with him. Martinez Salinas said that he was arrested one afternoon at Elio's in-laws' house while he was looking for a part for his car. He said that he had known Andretti years before, since he had dated one of her sisters when he was young. He said later that he had never heard Andretti talk about the cult. He said that she had talked about her school and marriage. He also said that Elio and Ovidio never invited him into the cult or talked to him about it. 2 months after Kilroy was confirmed dead, his parents founded the Mark Kilroy Foundation, which promotes drug awareness, education, and prevention through the Just Say No campaign. Since Kilroy's dream was to become a doctor after college, his parents decided to help others continue their dream, or should say his dream, through the program. And since 1994, the foundation has sponsored and worked with alongside Substance Abuse Free Environment, SAFE, a nonprofit community group that promotes awareness for substance abuse and drug prevention. Both of them partner with the Santa Fe local government, its school system, and the ones nearby, and with businesses and private donors, provides programs for an entire year. The full-time and part-time counselors visit school campuses during the academic year in Santa Fe and Hitchcock to hold programs for approximately 800 students regularly. When students are gone for the summer, the foundation conducts programs in summer camps by partnering with volunteers. They offer free outdoor activities like archery, golf, fishing, tennis, and swimming. The average of 550 youths participate in these programs every summer. And according to Kilroy's father, the purpose of these summer activities is to keep the youth occupied when they're not in school so that they're not going to get bored and think about consuming drugs. In September 1999, the foundation signed an agreement with the U.S. federal government to receive 10 yearly grants of $100,000. By the 10th year, the government intended to stop the funding and expected the foundation to be self-supporting. However, Kilroy's parents stated that the yearly expenses exceed $160,000 and that they would need to find new ways to make up the deficit. The Mark Kilroy Foundation was one of the 5 nonprofit organizations in Galveston County that receives proceeds from a bingo place in Lamarck, Texas. They also received proceeds from sales of the book Sacrifice, written by Kilroy's father and Bob Stewart in 1990. Now, besides counseling children and teenagers with drug advice, Kilroy's parents also advise young people who plan to travel for spring break, suggest to stay in groups, keep an eye on each other, and not wander off on their own. They also suggest tourists be aware of traveling warnings and abide by foreign laws and regulations when they travel outside the U.S., though they reiterated that people can get hurt in the U.S. too. After Kilroy was confirmed dead, the media framed the drug group and their religious practices as Satanists. For the most part, the U.S. media labeled the group as Satanists and gave little mention to the drug-related violence that was widespread in northern Mexico, thus failing to provide a wider picture of what happened in Matamoros. Reports concluded that because human body parts were found inside of a large metal pot, that the group practiced cannibalism. Some of the journalists made the error of attributing cannibalism with a common mistake of Satanist groups, sacrificing and eating human remains. Other writers, however, stated that Costanzo believed the devil in Palo Mayombe. In addition, some occult writers believed the nature of Kilroy's murder, which included mutilation and clandestine burials, were part of an occult tradition. When media coverage and allegations of Costanzo's affinity towards Satanism died down, several Afro-Cuban scholars stated that Costanzo's actions were fueled by his personal conviction and psychopathic involvement with Paleo Mayombe. They argued that Costanzo used Paleo Mayombe for his own financial, illicit, and psychological needs by convincing his cult members to help further his drug trafficking operations. Though, through human sacrifice, Costanzo promised his members that they'd be protected by the law, which in this case we prove false, other Afro-Cuban scholars, on the other hand, alleged that Costanzo's murdered Kilroy because he truly believed that requirement was needed, and in a distorted view of Paleo Mayombe. From that point of view, Costanzo's actions and what happened to the Matamoros could happen anywhere. In the 20th anniversary of their son's murder, Kilroy's parents visited the Rio Grande Valley and Matamoros to thank the people who had supported them in their search for their son. Kilroy's father stated that people were supportive and called the police whenever they saw something suspicious that they thought they were related to their son's disappearance. He said that it was easier to overcome their son's death because of the support that they received. Kilroy's mother said that she received a cross from a Brownsville woman who, when she was searching for her son in 1989. It's a reminder every time that I know that the Lord was involved in everything, she said, while she touched and showed the cross around her neck. Helen Kilroy died in 2014 from ALS at the age of 70. And that concludes another captivating episode, delving into the world of mythical true crime. I appreciate you joining me tonight as we listen to the facts from these true crime tales. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover even more mysteries. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's episode. Good night.